of your earliest memories that you had back when you lived on Assateague?
Well, well, uh, you want my name? Roy Jones. I was born on Chincoteague, June 6, 1919. 83 years old. Another one coming up. And when I was a year old, my mom and dad moved to Assateague. And I lived there until I was 13. And then we moved back on Chincoteague again. And I started school in the 3rd grade because there was no school on Assateague at that time. My dad went to school on Assateague. When I came along, we had to cross the channel in a boat every morning and walk from east side over to the school. And I played with the lighthouse keeper's daughters. And one of the daughters taught me 1 hour a day. And when I got ready to go over to Chincoteague, they said, well, you can start in the 4th grade. He said, no way can we start him in the 4th grade. We'll try him in the 3rd. So that's what I did. And people today are making books about the barrier islands. Now, when Assateague was inhabited, it seemed like nobody thought about Assateague. But for some reason or other, I guess it's the historical element about it, because I've been over to the parks, been over to Park Service one time and was interviewed. I've been over to the wildlife 2 times. A lady from Philadelphia who was named Peggy Sanday. She wanted to know about Assateague, and I told her she's writing a book. Also, she's writing another book. Now, I don't know what that's about. But I filled her in on all the things that I knew. And then when you say you once lived on Assateague, I guess they think that was way back in ancient times. Of course, I'm getting ancient myself. But that they didn't have electricity on Assateague. There was one telephone. And the people, everybody had a garden. And oysters and clams and fish and crabs and scallops and all that stuff, they were bountiful. Everybody had a garden. Everybody had a little flock of chickens. And the fall of the year, everybody salted a keg of fish. A keg of fish was something that would hold maybe 50 pounds of lard, something like that, And the people that raised the gardens, the vegetables that would keep, like turnips, sweet potatoes, orange potatoes, they put them in what they call, it was like a mound of dirt. They put the vegetables in there and then put the dirt all around it. And in the winter time, you could just go in that mound of dirt and get what you want. I mean, they wouldn't freeze. And one of the lighthouse keepers on the back side of what we call the hills are actually sand dunes, And on the east side of that hill, it was sheltered from the northwest winds, because that's the wind in the wintertime that gives us the coldest weather. And they would make this little excavation in the side of the hill. In the front of it, they'd put windows. And in the morning, they would get all of the sun and the sun shining in there, and they wouldn't freeze in the wintertime. And for recreation, we would get a crooked board and nail a piece across the front of it. And southwest of the lighthouse, the hills were covered with pine needles. And believe it or not, after 3 or 4 times down that hill, that board would get just like ice. I guess it was the oil out of those pine needles. And you could slide down those hills just like a snow sleigh. And when you got to the bottom, you picked your board up and went on up to the top, you know. And I played hopscotch with the Collins girls and all that stuff. I didn't pay any attention to it. I mean, just boys and girls. And Mr. Collins had a little boat. I guess it was about 24 feet long with a Kermit motor in it. And every morning he brought us across the channel, and that night he'd take us back. And winter time, if it was rough and a little bit of spray fly over the side, it would freeze. And I'd walk to school and go down in the furnace room, and then the ice would melt, you know. The bus would pass us, but they couldn't pick us up because we didn't live on the island here. And it was a way of life. There were no roads. The only road was what we called the Shell Road, and that went from the government dock up to the lighthouse. And the others were just footpaths from house to house. And sometimes we'd go up to Aunt Ida Jones's, and she would tell us ghost stories. And my younger brother, his eyes would get, she would talk about witches greasing themselves and going through keyholes. And my brother's eyes would get great big. And then when you got outdoors, you were scared to death. But life was simple. It was a good life. We didn't have to have any police or anything, you know. And in Assateague itself, in 1764, there was 27 people living on the island in 1764. Before 1900, there were 250. And then it kept dwindling down and dwindling down. And in 1925, it was maybe 60 people. They moved a lot of the houses from Assateague over to Chincoteague, right close to Church Street Supply. It's 2 houses that were moved from Assateague. Over on the east side, there's 2 houses. The church that was on the island, that's up Pony Pines a little ways. Right down the street here is a house that was moved from Assateague. So at the peak of Assateague, they had a grand total of 250 people. And then the people, they started, you know, moving Chincoteague. And There were down at Tom's Cove one time. It was 2 fish factories. People worked there, and they ran down the bay. And at one time around this island, there was 100 down the bay boats. Today, there isn't one. The people working in the water, well, everything just, and let's say 70 years ago, 90% of the population of this island got its living out of the inland waters and out of the ocean. Today, I don't imagine it's even 7%. So just as the water industry went down, the tourist industry has started building up. And today, if it wasn't for the tourist industry, this island would be like a ghost town. It'd be something like, have you ever been over to what used to be Franklin City? It's right across the bay. That was once a boom town. And I mean, it was a boom town because all of the freight that went off this island and came on the island had to come through Franklin City. There was a steamer that ran from Chincoteague to Franklin back and forth about twice a day. And then when the causeway was put in, well, that just about killed Franklin City. The train would back right down to the wharf at Franklin City, and they would load a box car with shucked oysters from here. And then by the same token, there were once a lot of poultry houses on here. And all the feed and everything had to come through Franklin City. And down here, what they call the steamboat dock, that's where the freight came and left. It's was it Chad's Lounge here? Is that what they call it? It's right down from that is where the dock used to be. They used to have a railway agency there. And then when the boats didn't fly across the bay, well, they hauled it in trucks. And when they were talking about putting the bridges and across, the fellow that was the head of it told the fellow that was bringing the freight across the bay, said, "I'm going to put you out of business." And he did. Because I worked with a fellow, and he told me before the bridges, were put in, if you went to Accomack for to take care of some legal matters, it would tear up 2 days. You took an early mail boat from Chincoteague to Wisher's Point, and he called it a hike. You took a hike from Wisher's Point to McKinley Park. You caught the train to Accomack, and you took care of your legal matters. Got the late train back to McKinley Park late in the afternoon and stayed all night. And next morning you took the hike back to Wisher's Point and then caught the boat back to Chincoteague. And now in 3 or 4 hours, you can go to Accomack, get your legal matters taken care of, and back home. Now, it's that much difference in traveling, but still, people lived then. They're living now. Of course, people are living longer now. I grant you, in 1900, I think the life expectancy was about 50 years old. 50 years. And I think the average wage in the factory was, I don't know, 27 cents an hour or something like that. And I've caught little neck clams. I don't know whether you're familiar with them since you've been to the island or not. I've caught those little neck clams out of Tom's Cove and sold them for $2 a thousand. And that was 20 cents a hundred. And now you've paid almost 20 cents a piece. But that's just the difference, you know, the way things have turned. She won't bite me. If she's from North Dakota, she won't bite me.
Live from North Dakota. You know somebody from North Dakota?
I have a niece that is right out of
The Assateague in the first place.
well, for one thing, well, you could get your own wood. You could raise a garden, and it was, if you worked to Tom's Cove, it was closer by. And if you were running down the bay, it didn't make any difference anyway, you know. And I'm talking about down the bay boats, and I have a picture of one just for you to give you an idea of what I'd buy now. Before the gasoline engines came along to put in boats, people went down to what we call down the bay, and that was anywhere from here to the Capes. The oysters, the clams, and then when they started putting the gasoline engines in, they converted them over to motorized vessels instead of sail. And the boats they sailed in down there are what we call sloops. A sloop is a vessel with one mast, a mainsail, a topsail, and a jib. And then there were some people on here that had two-masted schooners, and that's a two-masted schooner. That was Captain Dan Wilton's schooner. And have you been over to the beach where the ocean is? Well, you know that long, crooked finger they call the hook? That's where he lost that schooner. Not because of a storm, but I guess he was a little bit bullheaded. His son was with him on that schooner. And, well, sailing ships have what we call centerboards. And he told his daddy, says, you better hold this boat off. Says her board is hitting on the bottom. He says, she'll come up in the wind when I call for her. But he waited too late. And then, see, a sailboat can't back up. It can't reverse like an automobile, a train, or anything like that. And every sea would come, the waves kept putting her closer to the shore until she went up on the beach. And they tried to get her off, and when they were doing so, they hit some kind of an object on the bottom, and it tore a hole in the bottom of her. And he never could get her refloated. A wrecking crew told him that we can float your boat. He spent his money on trying to get it up. He never could. And he never did get back on his feet again. He carried out what we call them sports, down here for gunning and stuff like that. But that's really, and his house now is right across the street from Tommy Waterside Motel. Big house. And it looks like a sea captain's house, sort of that site. But he didn't lose the schooner on a kind of a storm or anything like that. But he just thought that, as we would say when he rolled the wheel down on that schooner, that she would come up in the wind. But she couldn't because she was hitting the bottom and the waves pushing her in all the time. And then as far as the ponies are concerned, I lived on the Assateague with the ponies and the cattle and sheep. And in the earlier days, and that just about when I was living over there, I guess, a lot of people had sheep and they would just let them go. And then in the first of the summer, they would pin them and shear them, sell the wool. And working on the water, the fishing, the clamming, the crabbing, we survived. Kind of like frontier people. But it was, I guess you would call it by today's standard, rough living. People had these, pitcher mouth pumps, or they had wells. Now, when we say a well, you take on the mainland and say they're going to have a well, they just drive this pipe in the ground, But the wells I'm talking about, they were these big, almost like stone things, shaped like a barrel, and one on top of the other. And, that's where we got our water. And it always stayed cold. And, I don't know of what time I lived on the Assateague, I never knew of anybody ever dying. What time I lived on there. Of course, there was only about 60 people. And, we moved off in 30 and 32 after a hurricane. And my sister, she was only 1 year old when we moved back to Chincoteague. And as far as I know, I'm the only person left that knows how things were in 1925. And every now and then somebody come along and say, Roy, why don't you sit down and make a sketch of how you can remember how Assateague was? So because when you're gone, it's going to be nobody. And nobody ever took any, pictures to see how things are. They might take a picture of one house or something like that. So when I'm gone, that the history of Assateague is, I could sit down and draw a sketch of Assateague, like I remember it, but I'm the only one that does. And the lady from Philadelphia, she wanted me, said, Roy, will you make me a sketch of Assateague as you remember it? I said, yeah. So I made her one. She came in January and picked it up. But going down the bay in those boats, they were work boats. They weren't yachts. And they carry anywhere from 4 to 6 seating crew. And had a little, we called them boat stoves. Gene, they weren't about that long wide, were they? They were, you seen these wood burning cook stoves? Well, this was a wood burning cook stove, but it was a little miniature, about that wide. and they took a stick of wood in the far box about that long. But you could cook. When you're down in the bay, you couldn't run the store. We had mostly canned food, some canned meats, because we didn't have refrigeration on the boat. And we made bread 3 times a day. Every meal we made bread. The little pans that we put our baked our bread in was about like that, because the little oven was only about that wide. But you could take good wood, good dry wood, and the top of that stove would get blood red. And I've cooked bread with the oven door down. Sit right there and watch it brown, you know. And today, I don't know whether they even make those little stoves today or not. The last person that I knew bought one was Earl Birch, and he bought it from Conant Brothers, and he paid $35 for it. I'll bet if you could get one today, it would cost $400 or $500, even if you could get one. As far as I know, and they had 3 brands of. They had the Shipmate, the Eli, and the Pat. They were the 3 stoves. Now the Shipmates had a thicker. The Shipmate's top of it was about that thick. The other 2 wasn't as thick, and the Shipmate would hold its heat longer than the other ones. You know what I mean? Because the metal was thicker. And when you went to bed, the whole cabin was a bedroom. When you ate, the whole cabin was a dining room. It was. I guess it was a hard life in one way, but I like to do it. And today there's not one Dyna Bay boat left.
Norman, you were over on Assateague. You remember many people from the island coming over to Assateague, your island, to visit on Sundays?
Oh yeah.
What do you do on Sundays?
Well, Sundays we didn't do much. The people that lived on Assateague didn't work Sundays. And when the little church was in operation, they would go to church. And I think before the little church was built, I think they held their meetings in the little 1-room schoolhouse. And that, have you been near the Assateague Lighthouse? You've not been over there? Well, it's nothing but, we refer to them as hills, but they were just sand dunes. And when you know what sand will do, it'll erode, it can blow. And my daddy, they sodded that hill. And my dad helped cut the sod. The sod was, I think, 8 by 8, I think 4 inches thick. And they put it right down on that hill, just like this. And I expect today some of that sod is still there. Yeah, just saying. If you've been over to the park on Assateague, where the ocean is, where the parking lot is, all of that area, that hook, like, all of that has made up in the last 100 years. 100 years ago, there was no Tom's Cove, there was no hook. Now, the only place that all of that sand had to come from north. I mean, it just shifted from north to south. And I think it was in 31 or 32, Ocean City Inlet cut through. Before then, you could go from Assateague to Indian River. That's in Delaware, isn't it? You could go from Assateague to Indian River, Delaware, right up that one straight beach. But when that inlet cut through that Ocean City, and they jetted that, and Assateague from the point on up to Ocean City Inlet, I think it's 32 or 33 miles.
Why were people moving off of Assateague then?
For one thing, it was a little bit inconvenient. And then there was a man named Sam Fields. He, somewhere or another, he acquired almost all of Assateague. And I don't think he relished the fact of people crossing his land. And then the younger people, they didn't want to live there. They'd rather be old Chincoteague because it was kind of like isolated. And today there are a lot of people moving off of here going to the mainland. Today we are about 20% Chincoteaguers. And when property is sold, the out-of-state people can pay more for it than the young people on here. Young people on here today, starting out, we would say starting from scratch, has got a hard job. I don't know what just an average size building lot would cost on here today. I expect what, 50,000? Yeah. So now if the husband and wife are both working and are making fairly good money, well, they've got a chance. But just a man working, unless he has a very good job, that's the reason most of the people a lot of people have to get trailers because that's about all they can afford. And somebody asked me one time, said, why are so many houses on here small? Well, because at that time, they couldn't afford to build anything any bigger. Just a lot of the houses, just like that little white one across there. That was only about, see that little white one right there on the other side of that car? That was just about a typical house, wasn't it? So that's it. And for some reason or another, I don't know why people built houses. A lot of houses on here are 1 block high. Right on the corner of Church Street and Pension Street on your right, when you're going in, that little house is about that high off the ground. I don't know whether people thought the wind would blow them away or what. But now you got to have what, 5 or 6 blocks high. But now I do know of 1 or 2 houses here that have, gone down in storms. But the average house on here is, particularly on that Main Street, you can go down Main Street from Bunning Road on down, you'll see a lot of typical Chincoteague houses. Now you can go up in Sunnywood Manor, Newport South, up at Pawnee Island. And I mean, some time ago we rode up there, and I didn't believe there were houses that looked like that. I mean, they are beautiful. They're no little teeny fellas, but they cost money.
What is the difference? You said before you were talking about the inland waters, people work in the inland waters and the ocean waters.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Well, see, when you cross the causeway, you can look to your right and there's Chincoteague Bay, and you can look to your left and there's a channel. Well, the when you go on down and you pass from Wilderness Beach clear on down till you get to the Capes, there are narrows and there's a bay, and then you'll come to another narrows and a bay, and it's just like that clean on down till you get to Smith Island, and Smith Island is right down to the Capes, and people clammed and oystered. They would take we call them monitors, but they were actually flat barges, and you could go out on public ground, and four head could load 1,000 bushel monster. And they'd bring them up here and they'd plant them out in the bay and out in Tom's Cove. When you go over to the beach where the ocean is and look to your right, all of that area is Tom's Cove. And I've seen the time when it was full of oysters. I worked for the Bunning Oyster Company for 40 years. And that was in existence for way over 100 years. And today in Tom's Cove, there's not one oyster planted. Mike McGee might have a few up there, right close to the Park Service. He's got a few little rocks there. But out in the big Tom's Cove itself, there's not one oyster. They would not live. Nobody knows. We have sent oysters, about all over the country when I worked for the oyster company. I've packed in a little wooden box when Eisenhower was in existence. For Eisenhower, and I kind of felt a little bit, well, here I am packing oysters, putting oysters in this little box for Dwight Eisenhower. It kind of, he didn't know who packed them, but I just felt good about it, packing oysters, and they were beautiful. But that's all gone. Like I said, the down the bay boats are gone. The monsters are gone. The shucking houses on here. Now, does Mike McGee shuck a few oysters?
He shucked a few.
Well, and Tommy Reed, he shucked a few, but I think he stopped. And the little, all around here on east side, there was 3 or 4 clam houses up deep pole over on western side with clam houses. And in the winter time, the clam bars then would buy the clams in the summertime when the market wasn't too good and plant them. In the winter time, you could go to find these places and you'd get a job digging clams to help out through the winter. And a lot of people that would go off, if they had some clam planting ground, they'd catch their clams in the summertime and plant them. In the wintertime, when the price went up, they would dig them. But now what it is now is just what they call aquaculture. It's called aquaculture. They get these little baby clams that you can't hardly see, and they put them in a special bag, and they put them off somewhere. And then when they get big enough to put out on the flat, they do. But you have to keep them covered up with a net. And then you have to keep the net clean so that the little clams won't smother, because the crab, the blue crab will take those, what a crab can do with those pinchers, I call them. They can just nick the end of that clam, and And that's it. See, the inland fisheries, there was a time when they had what we call fish pond or fish traps inside here. There was a big square thing called a pocket, and then they had what they called well, it was like a fence with net, you know, and the fish would come to that hedging and track it along and go into trap. But in the ocean, they had some sea traps there, but most of it, ocean fishing was done with nets, mostly gill nets. And there's some fellows here today that great, and they're one or two head in a boat and put out those gill nets. And then when the fish factories were running, they were these purse seiners. I don't know whether you're familiar with the terminology or not, but the purse seiner, they had two purse boats, and these boats would put these huge nets out when they saw a school of fish. They'd have a man up in the crow's nest, and when they saw a school of fish, the big boat would go up to them, and then the little boats would encircle them with this net. And these nets were made so you pulled on this line, and those nets would close just like a big bowl. You know, the nets went around them, and then you pull these lines, and the nets would come together just like a bowl. And they had two ways of getting the fish out of those nets. One, it was like you've seen a dip net, like you scoop up a crab with or anything like that. It was something like that, only much bigger. And they would put this big scoop net down in this net full of fish, and they had an engine that would hoist it up over the hole, and the bottom drop out, and the fish would go in the hole. And then now they've got a high-powered suction hose that they put right in this net, and when it comes up on deck, the water goes one way and the fish goes in the hole. So, and as far as Assateague Lake, I've watched them. Now today, when you go over to Assateague and you see that, or at night and you see the light flashing, that's electric. But I've seen them when it was a kerosene burning lamp. They had two big mantles. Have you seen these little mantles, Coleman lanterns, with a little mantle about that tall? Well, the mantles in that light, they were about that tall and about that big around, and they had two. And when they would light them, you could see down to the bottom, it would just look pink. And the further it got up, that pink would fade, and that would get so bright you couldn't hardly look at it. So that's why today they don't hardly need lighthouses anyway, because they got the navigational aids on ships today. And there is one lighthouse in the country, I think, that is manned. And that's up around the Boston area. Somebody who had a lot of political influence got them to pass a law that light would never be automated. And I think that's the only one. You take Assateague automated, they did away with the lighthouse on Hog Island. They discontinued that. The one down on Smith Island, some refers to it as Cape Charles Light, some refers to it as Smith Island Light. That's automated. At Assateague one time, now I can remember when there was 2 keepers there, the Westcotts and the Collinses, and right on the southwest of the lighthouse, there was a beautiful big building. The sides was German siding. It had a white slate roof. It had 3 apartments in it. And Mr. Cal Tully bought it from the government, took it down in sections, moved it to Chincoteague, but never did do nothing with it. And the other house where the Collinses lived, that's masonry, and that is still there. And the wildlife uses that. Because they asked me to come over there, I believe it was last fall. And that was the first time I'd been in that building, in 70 or more years. But I mean, it looked familiar, because I'd been in it years ago. But that's still there and it's intact. That's just as good as it was when I lived over there. But I don't know why the government ever let anybody have that beautiful building, because all it would have had was a little bit of upkeep. But that's how things goes.
Well, when you went down to the bay on them with the cruise and stuff, what's the most? I know you used to have a lot of boats laid together and stuff. What's the most boats you ever seen laid together, and where were you at?
Most of the time, there was nobody laid alongside of us. Now sometimes it would be 2, would tie up together. But the reason you couldn't do it if you were laying out in the bay or even in an Ayers, the reason you couldn't stay tied up together, because whenever the wind and the tide were in different directions, you get this rolling, and it would bump like that.
What was remember any bad storms while you were down the bay?
I never did take a bad storm down the bay, but, and I don't know what hurricane it was. They said that, I think they had a radio aboard the boat, talk about this storm, Well, you know how it is. Somebody say, well, I'd like to get one more tide in. And that's just the clock. The gulls hollers, the gulls squawk, and the light flashes in that clock there in the kitchen. Well, the wind kept breezing up northeast, started raining, and we came on them. We got right off Breast Queen Sound Point, and the motor died. And the ticket boat from Assateague Coast Guard Station was coming in to make a harbor. And they towed us up right across from the fish dock. You know where that is. And the hawser that they give us was about that big around. And the Coast Guardman tied that hawser to a big piling. And that's where we battled the storm out, right there in that channel. And then another time, we were working at Tom's Cove for Mr. Joe Pruitt, and that's when Franklin City was a boomtown, the same little place I was telling you about. He sent words to tell the boys to make a harbor. Well, we had one of those monitors with about 300 bushels of oysters right on the stern of her, and that put the bow in. I mean, you're familiar with that. And well, we only had a 24 horsepower motor in that boat. Well, we made out fine until we got out here in the bay, until it showed late, and the wind kept blowing harder and blowing harder, and the motor just cut. Every time that monitor would go up on a wave, it would only about pull the boat back. So we didn't make it to Franklin City. We made it right in the mouth of Swan's Gut. You know where that is. And well, when we got in the mouth of it, we had bushes and trees to the north of us, and we were making out fine. So that's where we weathered that hurricane. None of our people knew where we were. The only thing they knew, we had left Tom's Cove. They knew we came up the channel, and that's all. They didn't know anything about it after that. But we were making out fine, but our people didn't know where we were. And in that same time, when we were trying to make a harbor, the Ranger, I don't know whether you ever heard tell of her or not, the Ranger was a big dragger. We were trying to make a harbor, and the Ranger went to sea. That was it. She was never seen anymore. But somebody said they were drinking. They had to be drinking because a person with any sense at all, the way they think, you just don't go in the ocean when the wind is blowing a gale northeast. You don't go out here in these bays when the wind's blowing a gale northeast because it's too dangerous. We call them hawsers. They were ropes, If you aren't from this area, the terminology we use a lot of times, people don't know. But it was just a long rope, and we call them hawsers, Hawser. And they made the end fast to this big piling, and we laid there, and you couldn't walk the deck. If you wanted to go forward to see how the line was doing, see if it was chafing or anything, you had to get down on your hands and knees and walk forward. Because if you stood up, you'd be overboard. Okay, you got any questions?
Yeah, no. When you were living over on the island, do you remember any shipwrecks or any big celebrations that they had or anything like that over there?
No, I don't know of any
big. I know if it was a shipwreck, it would be all hands back to the beach. They would be there picking up what they could or anything.
No, what time I lived over there never was any, big ships wrecked or anything. I've heard my daddy talk about different wrecks, One time up there by the bow of the beach, this ship was wrecked loaded with coconuts. And they said everybody had coconuts. I know it was one time we stayed over there to the old life-saving station. We stayed there and, we worked that coat. And I would go up in the lookout and take binoculars, and I used to like to watch, Sometimes if the wind would breeze up northeast, the tugboat would drop her barges off because under Wallops Beach with the wind northeast, it's a little bit of a lee. You know what I mean? And then I saw one tugboat almost right off from where the park is on Assateague. She went on a shoal, and I could take the binoculars and you could see the sea breaking all up on her, and she went to pieces. But as far as any great big ships, no.
How about in
Hmm?
how about in celebration?
Like 4th of July or anything, did they have big, when they had sheep penning or
Yeah,
anything?
before I can remember. Just like say people used to have sheep, they had a sheep penning that was equivalent to the pony penning on here. People would come from everywhere in boats to come to Assateague to the sheep penning, and the women over there, they'd take these old big, well, we call them pots or cauldrons, big iron pots. It's one right here in my sister's yard. And they would have chicken pot pies and all of that kind of stuff. And I think you could get this big dinner for 35 cents. But people, that was a big thing, pony penning on Assateague, equivalent to pony penning on Chincoteague. Now, pony penning on here draws people even from overseas. Just like if they're going to fire a rocket, people come from all over. I was working there at the Birchwood Motel, and I would look at the license plates, in the summertime, and they were from all over. And one day I saw these two fellows come in on bicycles, and they had pedaled from Canada. Now, their legs moved more than once. And then one day, this Volkswagen came up there to the office. That little engine was just a purring. And I said, I don't know how you held together, because all down the sides had rusted out, But he told me up there they use so many chemicals and stuff to melt the ice is what causes the metal to rust. But she was from Canada and she made it fine, and the engine was perking, but before she was rusty. Just like a lot of pickup trucks around here, the tailgates are all rusty where they haul oysters and clams and all that. But I never thought I'd ever live to see a time when there was no oysters around here. Because Chincoteague originally was nothing but a seafaring community, and its people got their living out of the ocean and, as I told her, the inland waterways, and we were self-supporting. We were self-supporting, but for particularly the last 40 years, and we shipped all over the country just about. But most of the seafood went to the northern markets, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, like that. And when I think it was Plitt used to chuck here, he would load trucks and take them to Chicago. So they went. And during the war between the states, Chincoteague went with the north. Even though we were in Virginia, Chincoteague went with the north, because all of our products went north. And the people, what we call on the mainland, even today, don't think too much of Chincoteague. It's just handed down. You know what I mean, don't you?
Yeah.
One generation tells the other, yeah. The average Chincoteaguer is not too popular with the mainlanders. But that is the reason.
Can you talk a little bit more about your parents? What did your dad do? What was a normal day in the day of your
Well, when you my dad ran down the bay, he worked out at Tom's Cove, when you work on the water, if you're oystering or clamming, you work what we call on the tide. You work when the tide is down. Now, some days the tide will stay down maybe 6 hours, some days 8 hours. Some days when the wind comes northeast, you don't get to work at all. And Gene knows that. But he worked on the water. He ran down the bay. He dredged oysters with hand dredge, you know. And I've dredged oysters on a boat, but we had power dredges. All you had to do is dump your dredge and throw it back overboard. Cut them off. My dad lived to be 70. My mother lived to be 85. Oh, yes. I worked with my dad clamming. Been down the bay in the same boat with him. I mean, when you're in the same boat, you're in the same big boat, but everybody had their little boat. You know, everybody went their separate ways. Well, when you sign clams, and Gene can tell you more about it than I can, you look for the different indentions in the sand, the different shape. When a clam has two siphon tubes like that, and when he siphons, he'll make a indentation in the sand. Sometimes it's just like a keyhole. I've seen them down the bay when the keyhole was so big you could look right down the keyhole and see the clam. And then it's times, particularly out in Tom's Cove, and that's a hard place to sign clams. You've got to have eyes like an eagle. And they call that deaf and dumb signing. Deaf and dumb signing is it's not the pretty opened hole. It's just a little slight indentation or a little teeny bit of litter that when the clam siphons, you know. My eyes were never good enough to sign clams out Tom's Cove. Now sometimes out Tom's Cove they would show with a blue spot, or you could see them across the room. When the clam would he would expel the water and stuff at him, you know, and when it did, out to Tom's Cove, the top layer of sand is tan looking, and underneath of it is blue. And when he would siphon, that would put some of that dark sand up on top of that tan sand, and we call that signing by blue places. So, and then when you rake clams, you just pull your rake through the bottom. And when in the wintertime, that clam goes down deeper, and you can pull your rake, but you won't hit him. Then hand tongs.
Wade.
I never did learn how to wade clams. Now, what we call wading clams, I think the name of it is treading them. And people could go into what we call rocks. It was just a mixture of shells, mud, turf. And as people can go in those rocks, and on your feet you had what we call moccasins. It was a heavy cotton flannel. And they could go in the rock with their feet and feel a clam in the midst of those shells. I never did learn how to do it. And if it's on slick mud, I could feel the clam, but if I couldn't reach him with my hand, I never could get him up. That there are people that could take their feet, slide that clam up their leg, and you could probably do it. But I've been down the bay with a fella, and the water was deep. It was about this deep to him, and this is where he had clams coming over the side. He feel them with his feet, and I don't know how he got them. Some people could get them on the back of their toes, and what they call kicking them. Ray Beebe says, I can feel that clam and I can kick him, and I know right where that clam's going to be. I never did learn how to do it. I could hand tong, I could rake. Never was much of a signer because my eyes weren't that good. But and wading, as he said, I never. I tried it one night and I caught 235, and the next day my legs were sore, couldn't hardly walk. But I'd feel the clam, never could get him up top. And his people could get them just like that. I've heard Harold Dirksen say he could get two at a time with his feet, you know. And Ray Beebe said he could get that clam on the back of his foot and flip it somehow. Said, and I knew right where that clam was going to be. Well, we used to go down the bay catching little oysters. That the people, we bring them up here, and the people would plant them on their private grounds. That's why out here in the bay and out here at Tom's Cove, Mr. Bill Bunton used to plant thousands upon thousands of bushels every year. He planted them in the fall and winter and spring until the season went out. And then the next summer, we would go out there with oyster tongs that were 16-foot stales and tong our boats full. And then he would plant them on what we took them off of muddy bottom and put them on sandy bottom. And when you transplanted them like that, they would grow and get fat. But the last oysters that were planted in Tom's Cove, and they were planted on the sand ground, they weren't worth taking up. Nobody knows why. And I think Lee Savage planted 1,000 bushels out here in the bay, the last ones he planted, and they weren't worth taking up. So the people just had to give it up. And today, what clamming people does, or what oystering they do, they take their pickups and boats and trailers, and they go from, well, they go all down to Seaside from Quinby, Wachapreague, down here Folly Creek, and then go out in the bays. I never thought the down the bay boat would disappear, but it did. I always thought it would be oysters here to tong and shuck, but they're not here. Oysters are catch and grow. Legally, the oyster has to be 3 inches long before you can take him. That's on the public ground. That oyster will live just before he gets that big, and then he'll die on a gene. It looks like if he's going to die, he'd die when he's young, little teeny. But just before he gets big enough to take it, dies. And now they've gone to this aquaculture. Get these little clams all around Tom's Cove. It's only about full. My mother, she was born on the island here, and then she and Pop, they met and got married, and she never did work out for a living. You know, she took care of the family, and she could put chicken on the fry. While that was a frying, she said, well, she called it, guess I'll stir up a cake. She could be stirring up a cake, chicken a frying. If I'm cooking, I've got to stand right by it, or I'll burn everything up. But She could be frying chicken, baking bread, and making a cake all same time. And she knew how to take simple things and make a good meal of it. She was a good cook, but she cooked from scratch, and that's how she learned. Today it's instant potatoes. It's
So what was her day like?
no. Well, when we lived on Assateague, a lot of times what they call after supper. We would say it's after dinner now. You know, we'll go up to so and so's house because there was one radio on the beach, and the lighthouse keeper had that. Oh, it was a big set, earphones, a big tall pole with an aerial, and now you got radios you can stick in your pocket. And there was one or two of these crank up Victrolas, you call them, you know, with those disc records. Go to somebody's house and they would play that. Some of the people over there could, Mr. Wash Elliott made a fiddle. He got him some holly and he made his fiddle. Of course, he had to buy the neck and the strings and the tuning things, but he made the body of the fiddle, and I mean, and he could play just about anything he wanted. And Uncle Bill Jones, he could play an accordion. And like I said, they would go and they would, like Aunt Ida Jones, tell those ghost stories. And listen, she could tell them. And the more scarier that it would get, she would keep dropping her voice down low. Nearly about scared the breath out. And then sometimes a woman would put in a quilt, they call it, and different neighbors would come in and help the quilt. Those, I say it's almost like the frontier people. But we weren't too far from Chincoteague, half a mile, I guess.
Did anybody go outside of the home and work women?
There was nothing for them to do on Assateague. See, there was if the man didn't work on the water or go fishing or crabbing or whatever, of course, when the fish processing factories were going, some of the men worked down there. They would, these purse netters would come in with their fish and they'd unload them and they would cook them and they would press them, get the oil out of them. They put the oil in what we call drums, 55-gallon barrels, and then the rest was dried and it was made into fertilizer. So they had the oil and they had the fertilizer, and that's what they did. And when we lived Assateague and the wind was from the south, the smoke from the stacks would hover right in those pine trees, a blue, like a blue haze, and you could smell it a little bit different. But the people that worked to the factory said they didn't pay no attention to it. You can go down to Accomack if the wind is northwest, and from Purdue, that odor. Now, Mr. Woos Reed goes down there with us on the jail ministry, and I'll say, "Boy, Woos, smell that?" "No, Roy, I can't smell it." He says, "I don't know whether that's good or bad." He couldn't smell. Mr. Oh, I got to tell you about this character. Um, Mr. Bill Scott kept store. Now, he wasn't too particular about his hygiene. he he would get butter, and I don't believe I've ever seen anything like it. The butter came in a block about that tall and that square. And if you wanted a half a pound or a pound, he could pretty well, he would take his old big knife and go across the top. And he didn't have these computing scales. His scales, it was a big tray on one end, and then an arm and a little round place that he put the iron weight. It was 1 ounce, 4 ounces, pound, 2 pound. And when he gets your butter, when you got home, your butter had his forefinger and thumb prints on that piece of butter. You just took your table knife and scraped the fingerprints off. And he didn't have any kind of disease or anything. Nobody got sick. And I got to tell you this, Norman Jones was there one day, and Miss Scott, on I think it's called a Dutch cleanser can. It's a picture of an old lady going with a stick. She's chasing dirt. Well, Mrs. Scott looked just like that woman on that cleanser can. And they had guinea birds. Guinea fowl, they're called. Have you ever seen one? Well, Mr. Bill Scott had guinea birds. And Miss Scott cooked Mr. Scott either 6 or 8 guinea bird eggs. And they had a little dog named Lady. And Miss Scott cooked her 1 egg. Well, Lady ate half of her egg. And Mr. Scott finished his 6 and reached down and got Lady's half an egg and took that right down. It didn't hurt him. He never even sneezed. But he was, and when it came warm enough to go barefoot, he went barefoot. He had real clubby feet, They wasn't too long, but they were thick. And Mr. Scott himself wasn't a real tall man, but he was heavy built. And in summertime, he had a garden, and he'd come down to Cove clamming, and when he eat his lunch, he always have a tomato and had these blue bib overalls. And there would be tomato seed from here right on down. Some people didn't like him. I thought the world of him. And there was a little fella that lived on Assateague they called Assateague Bill Lewis. Because over on the east side, there was another man named Bill Lewis. Extras and them fellas. Well, to distinguish the Bill Lewises, he was Assateague Bill Lewis. So he was always, and Mr. Bill Lewis was about my size. And he was always talking about, he was going to put one on Bill Scott, going to put one on him. So one day, the fellows were down the cove waiting for the tide to fall, and here came Mr. Scott. So the fellow says, Bill, now's your chance. Here comes Bill Scott. You've been wanting to put one on him. Go ahead. Well, they fell together, and Mr. Scott grabbed Bill Lewis, threw him down on the ground, and sat on him. I don't think he bragged anymore about what he was going to do to him. But he was something. They had a church on the island. When that church was built, it cost $300. And that church They moved it from Assateague. They took the bell tower off, and they made a. And I'll tell you who lived in it. Mr. Lige Hill, young Lige Hill. That the house that he lived at, that was the church. No, Mr. Sawyer would come over, and then I guess different people, on like lay people, they would talk. Just like when we go to jail or nursing home, we don't have a preacher, but the lay people would do the talking. No, no, they didn't have any what you call social gatherings, but that meant they would visit a lot, particularly after dinner nights or something like that, but no formal gatherings.
And
No,
people that were musicians, did they play and dance?
no, no. They never knew of having any dances or anything on there. Now down at Hog Island, um, that was once a thriving little community, but Hog Island started eroding, and they had a place there. I think they called the Red Onion. And Saturday nights, that's when everybody gathered, and some people down there, could play music. And I have a book called Yesterday's Hog Island. There was a fellow there named Bell. They called him Sud Bell. You've heard tell of him. Sud Bell, I mean, he could pick a banjo. One day I was in Wallace Jester's barber shop waiting to get my hair cut, and Sud was in the barber chair, and he had his banjo, and he was picking his banjo while Wallace was cutting his hair. And I have a picture of now the Hog Island started eroding. They had a lighthouse on there, and it started eroding, and that lighthouse fell in the ocean. Then they built another. And the last time that I was on there, that the lighthouse was still standing, the white sand, from the beach was up to the lighthouse. And then they discontinued the light, and a man bought it. It was cast iron. A man bought it and cut it up. It's when scrap iron was high. Said he bought that and shipped it to New York and made a fortune. But the Hog Island light wasn't like Assateague Lighthouse. It was like a cylinder with the big guy lines, off from it. Jimmy Quillen and his brother and sister, they lived on there because Jimmy's father was keeper of it. And I guess today there's not much left of Hog Island at all. I've not been there for years and years. And down here to Wallops Island, that's eroding down there where they got their launching platforms and all that. They brought boulders in there that weighs tons and tons, and they put them along the edge of the beach, but they settle. And it was an engineer said that they'll go down 40 feet before they'll stop. So they've been fighting the ocean. And you take over here to the park. It's two things to think about. You can have your dunes that will keep the waves from breaking over. or you can let the dunes stay, and in a storm, the surge will take away the beach. You know what I mean? So I personally think you'd be just as well off to let the waves break in and push the sand to the west instead of losing it. Of course, I'm no engineer, but now down the beach farther, where they didn't have any dunes, it washed over, and it's washed over in Tom's Cove, because you can walk on the edge down there, up above where the old fish factories were, and you can look down and the water's right green. It's in the deep part of the cove. I can remember when where Joe Pruitt used to have his oyster beds. That's way back in the beach now. In other words, the beach has come over and over. So the beach is migrating westward. So I don't know. I don't know what. But if that little bit of beach, if they would close that little beach, what do you think would happen this summer? People wouldn't come here. People comes here to go to the beach. It used to be people come here to go fishing, but they're keeping rules and regulations, and people are losing interest. They're not coming.
So was there anything else out on besides houses, a church and a store?
Here's
I
an
mean,
Assateague.
Assateague, sorry.
Yeah, they had the church and the schoolhouse on Assateague. They had a church and a schoolhouse on Hog Island.
I'm just meaning Assateague.
No, on Assateague was just a church and a schoolhouse, and Mr. Bill Scott's supermarket. You could get flour, shortening, yeast powder, stuff to make bread. He had canned food, potatoes, and the basics, sugar and salt and canned milk and that kind of stuff. But
What about doctors? People needed doctors.
if you needed a doctor, you'd have to come Chincoteague and get a doctor and bring him across on the boat.
So women who had babies, did they let their sisters, were they born on
Well, I was born on the island here, and they had a doctor. My oldest sister and my brother, they were born on Assateague, but they had these, what would you call them, midwives? They had midwives. Now, when my youngest sister was born, they got a doctor from the island to come over there. But a lot of times the midwife is what did that. I mean, I'd be scared to death. Huh?
iceberg with you? Is there anything else that you'd like to say about living out on the island?
No, just like I said, it was, by today's terms, it was primitive living. But we had houses to live in. We stayed warm. We had plenty to eat. I never went to bed hungry in my life. It was inconvenient. If it was back in those days, in the wintertime, it was every winter just about the channel would freeze hard enough so you could just walk on across and come Chincoteague, and if you needed anything, you get it, and that was it. But we don't have those kind of winters now. Well, they talk about the global warming, and I don't know what's causing it. So I guess we were really cave people.
I don't him that.
But I don't. And the other day, a fella called me from Florida, and he says, "Roy says I'm going to do some. I'm going to do a book on Assateague. Says, can you help me out?" I says, I'll tell you what I know. He says, "Well, I got a friend up in New York or somewhere." Says, "I'll give him your name and address, and when he comes down, I want you to talk to him." I said, "Well, send him down and I'll talk to him." So different, and just like the lady from Philadelphia. And she says, "I'll be back again in June." And she paid me for what I did for her. And says, "I'll come back in June." Says, "I've got to get down before you are not be able to be any good to me." I guess. I mean, she met mentally, you know. I wouldn't. I couldn't give her any information. But so far, my mind's
Real good.
my mind's not too bad yet.
Yeah.
I can still think a little bit. But I like to talk to people. I mean, if people want to know anything that I know, I don't mind.
Well, we appreciate you helping us today.
Well, I don't know whether I've been any help or not.